Cracker Barrel is acknowledging mistakes and rolling out its rebranding campaign that has sparked a fierce public backlash. "We could have done a better job sharing who we are and who we'll always be," the family restaurant chain says in a new statement.
Whether you love it or hate it is change. It's pretty standard for companies to update from time to time, but not according to MAGA. The right is now calling the chain woke, and the stock price fell off a cliff today over it. Some of them are upset that they took away Uncle Herschel. The president's son asked, "What the F is wrong with them?"
Imagine a restaurant chain so beloved, so quintessentially American, that it managed to unite an entire nation not with food, not with nostalgia, but with outrage. Yes, outrage. In a country divided over nearly everything. There's one thing Republicans and Democrats, country folks and city dwellers, even Twitter warriors and Facebook moms all agreed on. The new Cracker Barrel rebrand was terrible. How bad was it? So bad that lifelong customers begged for the old, segregated bust-up looking to come back. So bad that even politicians who never agree on anything suddenly stood shoulder to shoulder, united in collective mockery. It was the kind of cultural moment you couldn't make up. But here's the kicker. What if this wasn't just a disaster? What if this failure was one of the most brilliant marketing stunts of the decade? What if Cracker Barrel, long mocked for outdated aesthetics, used chaos itself as a business strategy? Tonight, we dig into the bizarre saga of Cracker Barrel, its humble beginnings on the interstate, its billion-dollar knick-knack empire, and the rebrand, so despised, it might secretly save the company. Buckle up. This is not just a story about biscuits and rocking chairs. It's a story about deception, nostalgia, and the psychology of marketing warfare. Chapter 1. From gas pumps to gravy boats. To understand why this rebrand spiraled into one of the strangest PR spectacles in modern memory, you first need to know where Cracker Barrel came from. Because Cracker Barrel isn't just another restaurant, it's a relic of American highway history. Our story begins in 1969 in Lebanon, Tennessee, with a man named Dan Evans. Evans wasn't just some businessman chasing trends. He was a Marine veteran who had fought in Korea and later returned home to work in his family's oil company. By the late 1960s, he had a front row seat to a huge cultural shift happening in America. The rise of the interstate highway system. If you've ever driven across the U.S., you know how essential those endless stretches of asphalt are. But at the time, they were revolutionary. Before the interstates, people traveled on winding highways that passed through every small town. Gas stations, mom-and-pop diners, and souvenir shops thrived on that traffic. But once the interstates cut straight across the country, many of those little roadside businesses were doomed. Evans saw it coming. Instead of letting his oil business wither, he had an idea. What if there was a one-stop shop for America's new road trippers? Somewhere you could refuel your car, grab a hearty meal, and maybe pick up a little something to remember the trip by. So, in 1969, Evans built the very first Cracker Barrel Old Country store. It wasn't just a restaurant, it was part gas station, part general store, part southern kitchen. And it was smartly placed right off the interstate, catching weary drivers like moths to a porch light. The name itself, Cracker Barrel, was a nod to the old country stores of the 19th century, where barrels of soda crackers were common fixtures. People would gather around those barrels, talking about the day's news, swapping stories, or just wasting time. Evans wasn't just selling food. He was selling nostalgia, a vision of the good old days that travelers craved on long, monotonous drives. And it worked. Oh, did it work? The first Cracker Barrel was a hit. By combining fuel, food, and keepsakes, Evans had cracked the code on highway culture. It wasn't just a meal stop, it was an experience. You could fill up your tank, eat a plate of biscuits and gravy, and walk out with a harmonica, a toy cap gun, or a rocking chair for the porch back home. Very quickly, Evans realized that the real money wasn't in gas. Fuel margins were thin, and competition from bigger gas chains was only getting fiercer. But the food, the souvenirs, the nostalgia, that was where the gold was buried. So Cracker Barrel dropped the pumps and leaned fully into being a restaurant and general store hybrid. This pivot defined the brand we know today. By the 1970s and 1980s, Cracker Barrel was expanding rapidly along interstates, each location carefully designed to look like a slice of Americana complete, with wooden rocking chairs on the porch, checkers tables, and walls cluttered with antiques. But the genius move wasn't just the atmosphere. It was the gift shop. That little country store at the front of every Cracker Barrel turned out to be a financial juggernaut. To this day, about 20% of Cracker Barrel's revenue comes from knickknacks alone. Think about that $3.5 billion in total sales, and nearly $700 million of it is harmonicas, toy tractors, Christmas ornaments, and old-fashioned candy. It's a psychological trap disguised as charm. You walk in hungry, but there's a wait. And where do they make you wait? Inside the gift shop. For 15 long minutes, your kids are surrounded by shelves of brightly colored toys, while you're staring at candles, mugs, and live, laugh, love signs. It's less a waiting area and more like a carefully constructed mousetrap, and most families walk out spending more than they planned. By the 1990s, Cracker Barrel wasn't just a restaurant chain. It was a cultural institution. To many, it represented a comforting stop on family road trips, a piece of Americana that felt frozen in time. But nostalgia has its dangers. While some loved the old country vibe, others pointed out the darker side. The name Cracker Barrel, the heavy with Southern memorabilia, and a history of lawsuits over racial and LGBTQ discrimination, created a brand that was always walking a tightrope between charm and controversy. Still, the formula held strong. For decades, Cracker Barrel thrived while other chains came and went. The rocking chairs out front, the checkerboards, the walls plastered with authentic antiques was all part of a carefully engineered illusion of timeless America. And yet, by the 2020s, something was shifting. The food quality was slipping. Service complaints were piling up. And the younger generation didn't have the same emotional ties to Cracker Barrel as their parents and grandparents. Enter a new CEO with a new vision. And with her came the rebrand that would ignite one of the strangest, loudest cultural uproars in modern business history. Chapter 2. The rebrand that shook America. By the time the 2020s rolled around, Cracker Barrel was at a crossroads. On paper, the company was stable. But in reality, the magic that made it a roadside institution was fading. The food quality was slipping. Service complaints were stacking up. And for younger diners, Cracker Barrel wasn't charming, it was old-fashioned. So, in 2023, the company made a bold move. They brought in a new CEO, Julie Masino. She wasn't a Cracker Barrel insider. She didn't grow up in the culture of Southern kitsch and rocking chairs. She was, instead, a seasoned executive from Starbucks and Taco Bell. Now, that resume sounds impressive, but here's the problem. Starbucks doesn't need marketing. It's not like people watch Starbucks commercials. Starbucks wins by being everywhere and by feeding the caffeine addiction of millions. And Taco Bell, that's a brand owned by Yum Brands, which itself is owned by Pepsi. In other words, Taco Bell's entire purpose wasn't just to sell tacos, but to sell Pepsi. These were companies with ulterior motives beyond food. Cracker Barrel, on the other hand, only had one job: feed people and wrap it all in nostalgia. No banking schemes, no soda wars, just biscuits, gravy, and grandma's country fried breakfast. So when Masino walked in with her corporate playbook, she saw a problem to fix: modernize the brand. And that's when things went downhill fast. The new look nobody wanted. Imagine walking into your favorite childhood diner, one with walls covered in rusty license plates, old farm tools, and dusty photographs of strangers. Now imagine that overnight, it's all gone. In its place, white walls, minimalist furniture, a few antiques nailed to the wall with little plaques, as if you were in a museum. That's what happened. Cracker Barrel's rebrand stripped away the cluttered charm that made it unique and replaced it with a sterile, Pinterest-inspired design. It was like someone decided the country store should look more like an Apple store. And the logo? The folksy vintage design was flattened and simplified, turned into another generic, soulless mark. People weren't just disappointed, they were furious. The backlash was instant. Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, it didn't matter. Everyone agreed. The new Cracker Barrel look was awful. This wasn't about politics or taste or generational divides. For once, America was united in outrage. The comparisons came flooding in. People joked the new restaurants looked like hospital cafeterias. Memes declared the old segregated bus stop aesthetic was actually better. Even politicians, celebrities, and official accounts from opposite sides of the aisle agreed. This was a disaster. Think about that. In an era where people fight over literally everything, Cracker Barrel managed to do something extraordinary: create universal disgust. The fallout, the numbers spoke just as loudly as the memes. Within days of announcing the rebrand, Cracker Barrel's stock dropped 12%. That was nearly $94 million in value wiped out, at least on paper. And how did the company respond? By sending CEO Julie Masino onto national television to insist people actually loved the changes. The interview was surreal. Masino looked straight into the camera and said feedback had been overwhelmingly positive, claiming customers were asking when their local stores would get the remodel. But everyone watching knew the truth. Social media was on fire with negativity. Her words didn't sound confident. They sounded like gaslighting. It was almost too bad to be real. Disaster or genius? Now, here's where things get interesting. On the surface, this looked like one of the worst rebrands in modern history. But what if it wasn't? What if Cracker Barrel knew exactly what it was doing? Think about it. Before this controversy, when was the last time Cracker Barrel made headlines? Hardly ever. They were fading into the background, remembered only as a place your grandparents loved or a stop on road trips. Then suddenly, they were the talk of the nation. Negative press, sure, but press nonetheless. For the cost of remodeling just 30 stores out of over 660 nationwide, Cracker Barrel had put itself back into the cultural spotlight. And here's the twist: not every location was remodeled. In fact, the vast majority stayed exactly the same, which means when people hear about the changes, their instinct isn't to boycott tits, to rush to their local Cracker Barrel one last time before it gets modernized. That kind of urgency can spike sales like nothing else. If this was intentional, then the $94 million loss in stock value was just smoke and mirrors. It was a temporary dip in exchange for hundreds of millions in free publicity. In marketing terms, that's a bargain. The controlled demolition theory. So let's play this out. Imagine you're Cracker Barrel's leadership. You know some of your stores are struggling. You remodel the weakest 30, the ones you might close anyway. You spark outrage on purpose, using them as sacrificial lambs. Now the whole country is talking about you. People flock to the remaining 600+ stores, terrified they'll lose their beloved old-fashioned Cracker Barrel forever. Sales surge. Meanwhile, the remodeled stores fail quietly, and eventually, you shut them down exactly what you planned all along. Finally, after a year of cultural chaos, you swoop back in with a listening to our customers' apology. You restore the old logo, double down on nostalgia, and claim you've heard the people. Suddenly, you're not the villain, you're the hero. In one move, you've generated the most buzz your company has seen in decades, re-energized your customer base, and re-established yourself as a brand that listens. That's the theory. And if it's true, it's one of the smartest marketing stunts of all time. Reality check. Of course, there's a simpler explanation. Cracker Barrel just blundered. Maybe they really thought minimalism would attract younger diners. Maybe they overestimated their ability to modernize a brand that was never meant to be modern. The truth is, we don't know. But the timing makes it suspicious. Cracker Barrel didn't just remodel some restaurants, they also revamped their menu at the same time, bringing back old favorites and improving quality. Could it be that the outrage over was a smokescreen, designed to lure old customers back to try the food again? If so, it worked brilliantly, because suddenly, millions of people who had written Cracker Barrel off were talking about it again, and many of them walked back through the doors curious to see the changes for themselves. The verdict? So is Cracker Barrel circling the drain or playing 4D chess with its brand identity? Right now, it's impossible to say. Some believe the company is doomed, destined to fade away within 5 years. Others see this as a calculated gamble that might just pay off. But one thing is certain, Cracker Barrel has done what few brands ever manage. It has taken something as simple as a logo and a few coats of paint and turned it into a nationwide cultural event. Whether it was genius or stupidity, Cracker Barrel is back in the spotlight. And in the ruthless world of business, sometimes that's all that matters.